3, 2, 1, live.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone who has joined us today. My name is Ishani, and I will be guiding you through the web event. On the occasion of International Day of the Girl Child and on behalf of Room to Read India team, I welcome everyone to this virtual event called Girls' Education Driving Leadership in the 21st Century. Before we begin, I will quickly share a few housekeeping rules for all of us so that we are able to run the event smoothly. To ensure that there are no disturbances during the webinar, audio and video options are disabled by default. We encourage you to engage with the panelists during the Q&A session. You may use the Q&A option that is available on your Zoom window. In case of any trouble with audio or video, please disconnect and rejoin the session again. We are also parallelly hosting these sessions on YouTube and Facebook via the Room to Read India pages. So you can also join from there, and you can also share the links of those pages with anyone who wants to join the session. So without much ado, we can begin the session. As we're all aware that COVID-19 has created many difficulties for girls' education. This web event therefore strives to create a dialogue and explore ways to handle the challenges in girls' education in the current context and also identify steps for the future. To formally initiate the proceedings, I will now invite Room to Read India's Country Director, Saurav Banerjee. Saurav has close to 25 years of experience in the elementary education sector, working for government, non-government, and donor agencies. As head of the organizations, he has been instrumental in shaping the growth of Room to Read in India and scaling up of some of its programs in collaboration with government. It is my pleasure to invite you, Saurav, for the inaugural address and laying the context for today's discussion. Over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Ishani. A very warm welcome to this annual Room to Read webinar on girls' education driving leadership in the 21st century. Being the International Day for the Girl Child, I extend my best wishes to all organizations and individuals who are working tirelessly towards creating a gender-equal world. As an organization working on girls' education and gender equality, Room to Read has been witnessing with alarm and concern the spread of the COVID pandemic across the globe and the manner in which particularly impacted girls and other disadvantaged sections of the society. As families face financial stress, girls are withdrawn from school and exposed to early marriage, income generation activities, and trafficking, adolescence being the worst hit. Years of good work done by government and the civil society in the field of girls' education is at the risk of getting lost. As the spread of COVID subsides and schools are ready to welcome back children, the challenge for us now is to ensure that adolescent girls are allowed to get back to school and are provided with the opportunities within school and at home to make up for the lost learning and continue their education. Going forward, self-learning and blended learning are going to be key features of post-COVID education delivery. And girls need to be geared up for this new normal. To keep the focus on girls' education, Room to Read has undertaken a campaign, Har Kadam Beti Ke Sang, Leadership Ki Tarang. The aim of the campaign is not only to show solidarity to the cause of girls' education, but also to celebrate the exemplary leadership, initiatives, and life skills demonstrated by girls during the pandemic. The phase 1 of this campaign was held in July this year, and the phase 2 of the campaign is currently being held from September 28 to October 12. A series of online and offline activities are being held during this time in the Room to Read operational states of Chhattisgarh, Delhi, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, Telangana, and Uttarakhand, including commitments from stakeholders at various levels. The webinar today is a culmination of that campaign. The purpose of this webinar is to discuss the various actions that we need to take to champion the cause of girls' education as schools resume, ensure that we build back better. This may include policy-level enablers, curricular modifications, gender-responsive teacher and school preparedness, and community-level activities. We are privileged to have amongst us today an impressive array of speakers and panelists to dwell on this issue in detail and share their thoughts and experiences. I'm sure all of us will be highly enriched with the discussions that follow. So without wasting more time, let me hand it back to Ishani to proceed with the rest of the event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Saurav, for setting the context for the discussion. We can now move on to the keynote address for the day. Before I do that, I'd also remind participants that the Q&A section will be open for all audience members to post questions throughout. However, questions will be addressed only after the presentation. Our distinguished keynote speaker is Ms. Stephanie Foster. Stephanie is a recognized voice in women's leadership and empowerment. She is currently a partner at Smash Strategies and dedicated to advancing businesses, foundation, and nonprofit organizations on how to achieve better results by focusing on women's leadership and gender equality. Before co-founding Smash Strategies, Stephanie served at the US Department of State from 2012 to 2017. There, she was senior advisor and counselor to the ambassador at large for women's global issues. As a senior official, Stephanie represented the US in multilateral and bilateral forums. Stephanie also served at the US Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan, where she focused on women and civil society and traveled extensively to work with individuals and organizations, advancing the role of women in Afghan society. I welcome you, Stephanie, to the space. Over to you, Stephanie.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. It's evening where I am, but good morning and good afternoon and good evening to everyone. I am so happy to be here to talk about this critical issue, which is obviously foundational to gender equality across the globe. The one other thing I'd say in terms of my introduction is that my parents were both teachers. My father was also a school administrator and principal. So these are the issues that have been important to me and in my family my entire life. And in my household, certainly the issue of education and girls' education was really critical. So I'm going to focus my remarks today on a couple of things. Just set the stage a little bit about the importance of girls' education, which we've already done, and highlight a few additional points there. Talk a little bit about the impact of COVID, which obviously we've also talked about so far, and then move to how we can use this crisis as an opportunity to rethink education globally and to talk about what I'm hearing and seeing from others around the globe who are also focused on girls' education, because this is certainly not just an issue in India, but an issue everywhere. So as we know, gender equality is a critical goal, and girls' education is critical to gender equality. It's in fact foundational. We know that girls are positively impacted, of course, by going to school in terms of their ability to have better paying jobs, their ability to control their lives, their ability to be, participate more fully in their communities. But we also know that girls' education and ensuring that girls and boys have equal education leads to more stable and prosperous communities and countries and societies. Just to put it in context, by a recent study that's been done by a consulting firm that's well known, says that if men and women were equally participated in the labor force in each of their countries, global domestic product would rise by at least $12 trillion in the next 5 to 10 years. In India, that number ranges from 700 billion to 2.9 trillion. So obviously, the more women are in the workforce in equal numbers to men in the same kinds of equal paying jobs, there's tremendous possibility for economic growth. And that is all predicated, though, on girls and boys having equal access to education. So education is clearly foundational to economic growth. And it's important for us to think about that as we continue all of our fight for girls' equal access to school. I always want to say that, of course, education is a right. It's not necessarily the argument about economic growth is certainly true, but in and of itself, education is certainly a right that girls and boys have. But it does have a tremendous economic impact. We know then, we've seen in the last 20 to 30 years, tremendous progress in terms of closing that education gap around the world. It's closed almost totally in terms of primary school education between girls and boys, but still lags in terms of secondary education. But this is all pre-COVID. So while things have been going on for many years, I can think of all the different girls' education projects and schools I visited when I was at the State Department, whether they were in Africa, whether they were in Kenya or the Congo, in Liberia, in Afghanistan, just a lot of places around the world. In all of those places, the progress has really obviously slowed and in some cases screeched to a halt because of COVID. And we all know the negative impacts of COVID. Just generally, obviously, a huge economic impact with job loss and a lot of economic instability. But in terms of education, certainly what we see is that 1.5 billion students were thrown out of school at the height of the COVID pandemic. Obviously, people are starting to go back to school, schools are opening, but we still know there's tremendous displacement. And as was mentioned in the opening remarks, there are all these other issues that have occurred that have negatively impacted girls and their ability to return to school, from gender-based violence to trafficking to increased pregnancy. So we know that there are a lot of issues out there. But I think one kind of way to look at the COVID pandemic is that it also provides all of us, not just those of us on the call or people working on education in India, but all of us who are focused on girls' education. It provides, I think, a platform and a way to start thinking about how we can ensure that as we are reopening schools, building new programs, that we do that with a gender lens. And so that we build into the programs that are so important to ensure that both boys and girls are educated in every part of a country, whether urban or rural, that those programs are really built with a gender lens. So I think that is something that we can take from COVID, just like many people are reimagining many things around the world in terms of what COVID has prompted. I think it has prompted a bigger conversation about education and particularly the gender aspects of education. I want to now talk a little bit about some of the things that are being tried around the world with some success to really address COVID-related issues around girls' education. Some of these are things that were issues and were addressed pre-COVID, but they've obviously been heightened during the COVID pandemic. But just in general, I want to say three critical things as to frame that discussion. One, and this is, I think, very important, and especially in terms of all the conversations about girls' leadership, is that it's important to ask girls, particularly adolescent girls, to really be part of the process and to allow them to have voice and agency in developing solutions to the education challenges they face. It's important to listen to girls and to the challenges that they identify in their lives. Not every girl is the same, and not every community is the same. One way to do that has been done by one of the big implementers of development programs is to actually give, not to give girls a smartphone, because many of them either have a smartphone or someone in their family does, or they have some kind of access to video ability to ask them to just record a short video that can be uploaded about what their concerns are about going back to school, what ideas they have to address some of those concerns. So really looking at ways to bring adolescent girls, particularly adolescent girls, into these conversations. The second is that for those of us who work on systemic and system-wide change and policy change, to really ensure that there is a gender analysis done of the challenges that are faced in a particular community as girls are starting to go back to school. Not, as I said, not every community is the same. So really looking at why aren't girls going back to school? Does it have to do with safety? Does it have to do with policies that prevent girls who might have become pregnant from going to school? Is it because there are not enough women teachers in places where that's important? So I think a gender analysis is really critical, again, to help building strong programs that really can have a gender perspective. And related to that, of course, is then collecting the data on a regular basis, sex disaggregated data. So we see the difference in between boys and girls. We can look at the difference between primary school kids to secondary school attendees. So disaggregating it by age, by where people live. Rural and urban students always face different challenges in every country. So I think the sex disaggregated data can really help also embed a gender lens into the new kind of improved way we want to develop programs. And then lastly, and this is something I know Room to Read has done so much on, is really ensuring community buy-in, that education is important. Really making the case to the community on a daily basis about the importance of education, really talking to families, parents, so that they understand the benefits of education for their children, whether it's boys or girls. And there have been studies that have shown that when parents do understand the economic impact of having an education for their daughters, they're much more likely to send them to school and be energized and engaged around that issue. So I think those are kind of the overall framings that I'm hearing people talk about around the globe around girls' education. And I just want to end really with some specifics, again, things that worked before COVID, but I think are especially important for us to think about now that COVID is, really kind of the framework for for a lot of our lives, things that can work to get girls back in school. The first is really looking at reducing or eliminating tuition and fees. We know that that's a huge impediment generally pre-COVID for girls, even more so after COVID, where there's been job loss in families, a lot of food insecurity, a lot of just, economic sort of destruction. And so obviously, and families are confronting how they're going to be able to send their sons and daughters to school. Really looking at how to incentivize them to send their daughters to school. And one way is to waive school fees and tuition. We've seen that in Sierra Leone in Africa, the government has decided to do that for 2 years as an incentive to get people to really think about that they need to send their daughters back to school. Secondly, and kind of related, are looking at things like conditional cash transfers to incentivize behavior. Those things worked before COVID. There have been huge studies that show that giving people either a cash incentive or some other kind of incentive, livestock in some cases, can really drive up education rates. There's a big study that was done in Brazil when conditional cash transfers were used there to really incentivized families to send their kids to school, to get better health care. And it really had a huge impact for girls in terms of not only their enrollment, but their that they stayed in school and kind of progressed through the years. Thirdly, is this issue of pregnant teens. We're seeing, again, that this is a huge issue in the COVID era. And so looking to develop policies that don't kick pregnant teens out of schools, which had been happening for a while, but really encouraging governments and local school systems to to put in place policies that actually help girls stay in school. There's been some evidence that this is working, but I think there's a lot more work that can be done on this issue. And then the last thing I want to say really goes to the issue of the digital divide that we know exists around the world in terms of access to not just a computer, but being able to use the computer at home. And so since we're going to be living in a hybrid world for education, it's really important to both understand that there is that digital divide and really look at ways for there to be better access for girls to smart devices, to computers, to broadband internet, so that they can have equal access, even if they're not in the classroom. We're seeing that there's a lot of conversation about how to do that, and that's a lot of issues, a set of these same issues across the globe. So I know we have some questions, but I really want to just kind of end my presentation by saying, I think that the most critical thing to think about now is really how to look at all of these various policies that are being put in place with the gender lens, needing to ensure, of course, that there are sufficient resources to ensure that the policies can be as effective as possible, but really ensuring that we are asking the people who are the most impacted, girls and adolescent girls, to really be part of this process, and their families, of course, so that they can outline and really feel that they have a stake in their own futures, and that we listen to them as we create policies that really build in gender and hopefully bring us out of this COVID epidemic in a pandemic in a way that builds a stronger and more equitable future. So I'm going to stop there. I know we have some questions. I see them. Perhaps I'm not sure how you all want to handle the questions, but in any event, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you, and I'm happy to answer a few questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that insightful discussion. Like you said, there are a lot of questions coming in. So I'd like to pick the one that seems most reasonable to me at this point, because it resonates with me as well. You spoke a lot about listening to the voices of adolescent girls and making them part of the decision-making process. How do you think we can listen to them? And how can various stakeholders listen to them? For example, how can governments listen to them? How can donor organizations really involve them in decisions of who they want to fund, or who they want to reach out to, or help them with their resources? Or as teachers, as educators, how can we listen to them? And lastly, as parents and caregivers, how can we really have their voice taken into account? So can you really support us with that, Stephanie?
Sure. I mean, I think there are many ways that we can ensure that those voices are heard. Certainly one is the example that I gave in terms of, asking girls to upload a video link, a video, and then, about what their concerns are, how they can be part of the process. But I think also that seems not quite systematic enough. Looking at, as schools are starting to develop their plans for going back, having specific outreach sessions where girls can come and speak to teachers, to school administrators, perhaps doing focus groups. Also, and this is very, I think, important in terms of the kind of work that you all do, sometimes that's not a good forum for girls or boys, frankly, to say what they think. So really having a systematic way to go out and talk to some of the students, to give them an opportunity to be part of the process by having individual conversations, by figuring out a schedule that works, whereby people can, sign up and can come together, be part of that process. The other thing is also looking at ways that we can gather, or anyone can gather written statements as well that can be put together and kind of put into the decision-making process, having hearings. I don't really know that they would be traditional hearings, but forums where girls or networks of youth-led organizations could come and talk about what they're hearing from their members. So taking it a step outward, so it's an organization, either a girls' organization or a youth organization, could gather that information themselves and then present it. So I think there are lots of ways that this can happen. Really just depends on what works the best for the community, and how, sometimes some communities like to get information one way or the other. But I think looking at ways that both individuals can come forward, and that these organizations, there are always a lot of student groups and youth organizations that can then come together, gather information from their members or from others, and then present that. So I think that's a very important thing to do. And I think there are just lots of different ways to go about getting that information.
Right, thank you. Thank you so much. Another question that's come in is, as you emphasize that education has a great economic impact on individual life, girls and young women face severe economic shocks due to COVID. In your opinion, what strategies and steps need to be adopted by the governments at national level to help overcome the situation? There is a related question to this as well. How do you think gender transformative financing is critical for rebuilding a gender equal education sector? Any good practices from any countries?
Okay. So I think those are two big questions. In terms of the latter question, in terms of the financing, I think that part of the issue is that we see this across the globe. Policies get put into place that can be very progressive in terms of really making a change. But if they're not adequately funded, they don't really have the necessary impact. We see that in a lot of places across the globe. In the United States, we have a lot of great examples of laws we pass and then we don't adequately fund them. And so by definition, while the policy is there, and that's a good first step, it needs to be appropriately funded. And as we're doing that, we need to look at the gender aspects of the financing. So I don't have a specific example in kind of a short snippet here, but to say always critically important that policies are put in place, but then fully resourced. And that's funding for school, for building schools, for teachers, for curriculum, for all the things that go into ensuring a really robust and effective education. So I think, that's just really important. And tell me what the first question was again, because I think I've forgotten it.
Yeah, in terms of the economic impact that COVID has had on the livelihoods, and girls have also faced severe economic shocks. In your opinion, what strategies and steps need to be adopted by governments at national level to help overcome this situation?
Well, I think, what we've seen globally, and this goes across very developed countries, sort of medium countries, and that sort of very low income countries, is that the shocks have come at the expense of women and girls. So there's a tremendous shock in terms of caregiving and women sort of the reversion to traditional gender roles. In the US, just to use the example of the United States, we've seen, a lot of the kind of supervision of essentially internet homeschooling has fallen to women. And so that's had a negative impact on their ability to participate in the economy at the level that they had previously participated. There's been tremendous job loss, and we see that a lot of women are opting to not go back into the workforce. And that obviously is a trickle down to girls as well with severe economic shocks. I think the biggest thing that countries need to focus on with that is to really look at how to ensure that household responsibilities and care responsibilities can be shared equally between men and women. And a lot of that goes to funding for, are there funds for childcare? Are there funds for ensuring that women aren't the people who have to bear the brunt of those of all the time? Not that it's a horrible thing to take care of your kids, but it does take a lot of time. So I think that's really looking at the policies and seeing if there are interventions that can really subsidize care so that women in particular can then resume their economic participation. Secondly, I would say that we also need to think about is that for some people, working remotely has worked out well, but that's only for a certain group of employees, for people who have certain kinds of jobs. So I think we also need to look at how to ensure that people who do go to an office or a store or, deliver food every day, are there things that the government can do to try to make their employers be more flexible as well in terms of the work that they do and the hours that they work? Those are big issues that are being discussed around the world. Every country is different, obviously, but I think more of a focus on subsidizing care, responsibilities, and then also looking at how to ensure that there's more flexibility for every kind of employee and every kind of worker.
Thank you, Stephanie. I heard you say about inclusive policies and also making them contextual so that different types of girls, different types of women from diverse realities are being accessed. So we have a similar questions along these lines. How do you make sure that financing is intersectional in the sense that it's reaching out to young girls from marginalized castes, religions, and sexualities?
Well, I think the first way you do that is to collect data to make sure you understand that intersectional nature of every single person's life, right? We're all defined in different ways, right? By our sex, by our age, by our ethnicity or caste, by where we live. And so I think the first step towards that is to ensure that the data first of all, that data is being collected, because shockingly to me, as long as I've done this work, there's still a lot of places where we don't have even the most basic data on what the barriers are that girls face in this case, or what solutions might actually have the most positive impact. So ensuring that data is being collected and then looking to collect data that is the most intersectional possible. I mean, it's really hard to collect every little piece of data, because I think, you want to make sure that you're also not making it kind of onerous for the people who are working, doing this every day. But I do think it's really important to look at the critical pieces of data that are needed, so that again, every community is different, but that data can then be used to really first understand the intersectional nature of people's lives, and then develop programs and system-wide policies that can then address the issues in an intersectional way.
Thank you, Stephanie. When you talked about the significance of gender disaggregated data, how do you think we can capture data on the girls who are now invisible in the education system? Also, what could be the possible challenges in this regard? For example, out-of-school girls, street girls, girls who are not within the system where we can get data about them. So what steps can we take in that regard, and what challenges lie for us?
Well, those are the challenges, right? And, it's certainly true. For example, when you, in any country, when there's a census done, there are always people who are harder to reach and often fall through the cracks. So I think part of the issue for girls who are invisible or harder to reach is, what are the ways that data can be collected in terms of going out and finding them, as opposed to, I think for many of us, we assume that the data gets collected when we go to get a service, when we go to enroll for school, or we go to try to get a business license. We're going to check the boxes about our sex, our age, et cetera. But I think it's imperative to really get at and get to those who are more invisible by going out to them and figuring out the most effective ways to really get information about them. Often I think that can be done and crafted at a community level by talking to community leaders and elders who know kind of how their community is structured, women who know, where are the sort of where are these pockets of people likely to be. So I think it's more about looking outward and saying there are groups of people who we're not reaching. How do we reach them? And then working with community leaders. And again, youth could be youth-led organizations, or they could be women-led organizations, or savings and loan associations where there are lots of women leaders, to use those community assets to go out and really essentially try to find as many of those, girls as possible and ensure that their data is collected. I think some of the pitfalls are obviously just that. It's very time consuming. And also, I think there are always some trust issues. So those are some of the challenges. But you're right, or the questioner is right, that it's important to collect that data and reflect the needs of the people who are the invisible, kind of in the shadows.
Thank you, Stephanie. We have another couple of more minutes with us for the interaction. So we'll just keep an eye out for more questions that might come in. But thank you so much for your insightful comments and directions that you've set for us today. You've made many important points in terms of really, listening to voices that you're taking decisions for. So including them in the decision-making process. I think it's really important to have adolescent girls featured in the right places, in the right roles, for them to be aware of what policies are finally impacting them, and they can also have some say in that policy. Apart from that, I think you've also spoken about collecting data and what it really means, and how it can really aid the process of girls coming back to school and setting things in motion for girls' education, especially about the shocks that the pandemic has impacted the system. So thank you. I think we have one final question that we can address in terms of listening to voices, and can there be a linkage between listening to girls' voices and any systemic policies? Can we tie those two together and escalate girls' policies that are targeted towards girls?
I hope so. I think that's the whole theory, is that by engaging with them, girls, that we would be able to get a better sense of what they need, and that they could then be part of the policymaking process. I do know, and one other idea, which I think works in some places, and again, this is up for people to figure out if it works. For example, in India, is in some places, we have these parent-teacher associations that in the United States and across the globe, they're called different things, but that sort of manage and make policy at the local level. There are there's often a position or one or two slots on the leadership of that for students. And there could be one or two positions in any kind of decision-making body around education, whether it's a parent-teacher association or a school board or a community board that makes policy. Oftentimes, having a student voice or one or two student voices can really make a difference, because then those voices are brought directly into the policy making process. I would argue it should be more than one student, because I think that whenever you're the only person, whether you're the only student, the only woman, the only, whatever, it's harder to really speak up. If you have at least a couple people who are in the category you're in, I think it makes it easier. But I think that can help directly tie the engagement of young people, students, girls, boys, to policies that get made about their school, their education, what they need, and how that is all going to be structured, particularly as now schools are reopening and we're moving into this new post-COVID era. So I think that can be a way to tie those two things together.
Right. In terms of us looking in the future now with the COVID experience, all the learnings that we've had, however difficult they had been for us, what should be the specific strategies that we should opt in case that we were hit by another pandemic in the future, to ensure that girls' education is not impacted in the way that it was, it happened for us this time? So what role can, civil society and even governments play to really strengthen or create an ecosystem, from all the learnings that we've had in the pandemic this far, so that in case we are faced with another such struggle or another such situation, we can be better prepared?
Well, I'm sure we're all going to be, unfortunately, faced with some other huge issue. We have climate change that's having a tremendous impact on our environment, and then it has an impact, obviously, on a lot of other things around us. I don't know the real answer to that. I think, though, NGOs, groups like Room to Read, can really work in partnership with governments and the private sector to really build strong community buy-in for girls' education. I think there is so much data out there about the positive impact of education for the individual, for her family, for her community, for her country. And obviously, there's a need to ensure that boys are educated too. So I want to just make sure I say that. But I think the more that everybody who's involved, government, private sector, and NGOs, can continue to tell the stories of why girls' education is important, how it's made a difference, and in specific people's lives, how it's made a difference in communities, I think that's a really positive way to move forward and build more resilience into the system. I will say, the last thing I should say, I worked in Afghanistan, and obviously things are not going well in Afghanistan for education for girls right now. But I think I do take away an interesting point, which is that is what people are talking about, that one of the, and there are many issues with the Taliban taking over the country, is that they are not allowing girls to be educated equally with boys. And that is one of the biggest conversations that people are having globally about Afghanistan. And I think what that says is there is such buy-in around the world about the importance of girls' education, and it's important to just keep driving that home.
Absolutely, Stephanie. I think it's the future will definitely be enriched by the likes of us and our views and our buy-in into girls' education. Thank you so much, Stephanie. With this, we will wrap up the Q&A session and the interaction session. So I really thank all audience members who've really taken part in this discussion and enriching this further. Without much ado, I would like to welcome Lucina Timeko to the space for her special remarks. Lucina is a senior expert, advocate, and writer on women's leadership and gender equality globally. She currently serves as Senior Director for Girls' Education and Gender Equality at Room to Read. In her 15 years of international development career, Lucina has worked in various capacities for a wide range of international nonprofits, including Vital Voices, International IDEA, the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, the Wilson Center, as well as UN agencies. Welcome to you, Lucina. Please take over.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I also would like to extend a big thank you to Stephanie for being such a fantastic ally and supporter of Room to Read's work. Stephanie has been essential in helping us shape our steps forward towards increasing our focus to gender equality within our whole organization. And she has accepted to speak at this panel with us. It's 10:15 p.m. her time on a Sunday. So only a real friend and a dedicated ally would do that. So thank you so much, Stephanie, for having been with us, and absolutely feel free to go to bed now. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. And I would really like to echo some of the things that Stephanie has talked about and to get into some of the details of some of the things that were covered. So I will particularly focus on what the situation is for girls' education right now around the world, how Room to Read has reacted to this situation globally, and how are we making sure that girls are part of the process of defining programs that work for them for this moment. And finally, what can we do looking at the broader system reforms that need to take place, and in particular, what has Room to Read done in that respect? Like Stephanie, I am optimistic that more and more conversations are being had around the importance of girls' education. Just as a couple of weeks ago, there was a very thoughtful article on the magazine The Economist that looked in particular at the importance of girls' education for building prosperous and stable society. So the importance even of girls' education for having countries that are more peaceful and more democratic. Yet, this commitment to girls' education in many places is being heavily tried by COVID. The UNESCO estimates that 11 million girls may never return to school. Girls aged 12 to 17 are particularly at risk of dropping out of schools in many countries. And this is because really this situation has uncovered in many ways the very many crises and vulnerabilities that adolescent girls were already facing, how they were already asked in many ways to often care for younger siblings or work in addition to study, and the economic instability brought in by COVID and the very many losses have made this situation even worse. We can only show some numbers that are particularly troubling. So when schools, for example, reopened after 6 months of closure in Uganda, 18% of grade 12 girls did not come back, compared to 2% of grade 12 boys. And I'm saying it not because I do not value the importance of boys' education. It's absolutely crucial, particularly if it's gender transformative education, but because I think we must all recognize that there is still a very important need to focus on girls' education, because in so many countries around the world, girls' education is still particularly under threat. A survey of nearly 4,000 adolescents living, particularly in Kenya, in various both urban and rural settlements, found that 16% of them, compared to 88% of boys, did not return to school when schools reopened. So double the number of girls did not return to school. And in many cases, the not returning to school was also brought in by pregnancies. Pregnancies have been one big driver in many countries during this pandemic of girls deciding to drop out. And the pregnancies were often brought in either by enforced marriages, early marriages, or pregnancies that were the result of transactional sex work that girls felt they needed to do in order to contribute to their family's financial sustenance. So you can only imagine, given this situation, the impact on girls' mental health and well-being, and the impact really on their possibility of continuing their dream of an education. Room to Read has always believed that education is extremely important. It's crucially important for girls to complete at least the end of secondary school, and also to have a kind of quality education that allows them not only to learn maths and science and language arts, but really to learn those critical life skills like decision-making, critical thinking, negotiation tools and communication tools that are proven to be actually in the long term, oftentimes even more impactful than simply just getting a degree per se. So Room to Read focuses very, very deeply in helping girls as they nurture those life skills and as they grow them, because we know that unfortunately they will face so many challenges in lives and they need to be ready to face them. They can be ready to face them if they receive the proper support. So over the course of the pandemic, knowing how the situation is, Room to Read has supported overall more than 2 million adolescent girls. We have distributed hard copy learning materials directly to girls' home, and we have partnered with governments and local stations to broadcast life skills lessons over the television and radio. And we have shared learning materials over the internet and phones. We have provided individual remote mentoring to over 37,000 adolescent girls across the 8 countries in our portfolios. And this means that really our staff has been picking up phones to reach out to girls, check in with them, encourage them to continue their studies, and make sure that they were well, that they were staying safe from COVID, and with an eye in particular also to their psychological and emotional well-being. Our community of mentors, amazing mentors in all the countries where we work, has provided more than 400,000 remote mentoring sessions over the phone and video calls, and well more than 3.3 million direct messages through SMS across 8 countries during the pandemic. So we know that these connections have helped girls maintain the dream of their education and have helped us to understand which situation the girls that we work with were facing. And over again, we heard that girls were concerned of not returning to school because of the hardship that their families were facing, at times the loss of critical parents or guardians that could support them. And we have acted accordingly to try and support them with the learning materials that they needed, trying to talk with their families about the challenges that they were facing and to support in however ways we could. Yet, I don't want to give the impression that we are just reacting to the moment. Girls' education was a crisis before COVID and will be a large crisis after COVID that does require a systemic response. And that's why, in addition to the work we do with individual girls, Room to Read really is working to improve education systems all over the world. In Tanzania, we have for years collaborated with the Tanzania Institute of Education, the Ministry of Education, basically, to shape the development of national guidelines on life skills curricula. As a result, the ministry has invited Room to Read Tanzania to be the first organization to submit life skills and financial education curricula for formal review and approval under these new national guidelines. This is really paving the way for our curriculum to be widely adopted and implemented in all our schools in Tanzania. In Vietnam, we have been supporting for years the Ministry of Education and working in partnership with them to develop and implement a mentoring module on student conflict management, because we heard that this was a very large problem, and we knew that our experience of working directly with girls and training teachers could be of help. So this module on student conflict management has now been adopted and is an official reference book that supports school teachers and headmasters as they mentor their students. And we have provided trainings to teachers and headmasters to better understand best practices in working with students and helping them solve their conflicts in a way that is truly, truly productive and transformative. And of course, with a deep, deep focus on gender, because everything that we do is gender transformative. So I'd like to close in many ways, as I started, with some words of hope. I do believe that the moment is really now to step up commitments for girls' education, as more and more countries have recognized the incredible importance of girls' education for achieving world sustainability, peace, for getting sustainable responses to climate change and mitigate and adapt to climate change. We have heard more and more heads of states making bolder and bolder commitments on this issue through the G7 and many other international fora. We need to make sure we're making true by those commitments, by developing the type of policies and implementing the type of policies that Stephanie has talked about, and the type of programs that Room to Read has been implementing for many years, because we know that they work. And I am thankful to the India team for the amazing work they have been doing in the country. I know they will be talking about it, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I want to say it has been absolutely transformative, and we are thrilled to support the team as they lead their work on girls' education in your country. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucina, for bringing in Room to Read's perspective and experience of having responded to COVID in different ways. We have a couple of questions for you, Lucina. I'd like to begin by the first one that we've received, which is, can you share from your experience of Room to Read on what preparatory work has been done internally on streamlining feminist mentoring during the pandemic?
Great. So Room to Read, right away when we realized that the pandemic was something important, was going to stay with us probably for a while, we reached out to our country offices as usual, and they were even ahead of us in the understanding of the relevance of the pandemic and the type of impact that it could have on girls around the world. Because, for example, we have several country offices in Southeast Asia. Those country offices had already seen the incredible devastation that COVID-19 could bring, and were able to alert us so that we would, in our turn, alert the rest of our country offices where COVID maybe had not yet appeared or had not seemed such a challenge yet. With this in mind, we were able to define global guidelines for mentoring and working with girls to make sure that the connection that our social mobilizers and community leaders and teachers were keeping with girls were connections that really put the girls first, put their safety, put their well-being first, and clearly had an important element of making sure that they could continue their education. And at the same time, also wanted to give them the space and the time and you know, the listening ears so that they could share their concerns and even mourn their losses. in this respect, we devised a methodology that enabled our social mobilizers and teachers to really strengthen even further the connection with the girls and make sure that they felt safe enough to share with us their troubles and their concerns and the challenges that they were facing. And as a result, we were able to devise strategies in turn that could provide a response to at least some of those concerns. And so we were thrilled by the responses that we have had. Some of the early evidence that we have found were in many countries, the really greatest majority of girls were able to return to school. Of our girls, the girls that were part of the program were able to return to school once the school opened. And we really hope that we'll be able to maintain those learnings and those lessons as schools reopen everywhere.
Thank you, Lucina. I think even now that schools are reopening, and it's not just the girls who face the different structural challenges, gender-specific challenges. Teachers and mentors themselves are also dealing with very similar gender-specific, challenges. So how do we enable them? How do we empower them for them to be, further working on capacity building the girls in terms of, training them, in terms of helping them develop their life skills? So how do we create that ecosystem, and how do we then strengthen that ecosystem as well? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have been working for many years on very structured training materials that could help teachers and community leaders, the fantastic social mobilizers that we work with, for example, in India and in many other countries, to really connect with the girls and support them and mentor them in the way that they need and they deserve to be mentored, to be in many ways role models, the types of role models that many girls do not have in their lives. So those materials have always been there. And we are now looking at even strengthening them further and making sure that the trainings that we provide also include an important dimension of caring for caregivers. So we have been working on a caring for caregivers training package that really aims at helping our staff and the teachers that we work with deal with the trauma that they're often facing as they hear the most heartbreaking stories from the girls that we work with. And as the girls share their concerns for the future, we know that our staff and the teachers and so many teachers around the world take on such a burden in trying to help those girls. And we are working to try and make sure that they feel nurtured themselves, that they themselves can find the peace to deal with some of those really very difficult emotions and very difficult challenges. So this is something that we have been working on recently, and we plan on working on even further in the years to come.
Thank you. Lucina, we have two very similar questions. In terms of not just COVID, we've seen in the recent times many countries, many states in India being impacted by climate concerns and climate induced issues. And, they will also have dual challenges that we'll face. We'll have structural challenges and we'll also be faced with climate adversity. So is there a connection between how can we bridge the gap, and how are we looking at convergence between girls' education and environmental or climate-induced concerns and changes?
We know that girls' education is really crucial for getting to climate solutions. We know that women and girls all over the world are often the most impacted by climate events, as very often they are the poorest among the poorest. They might be the least mobile in many countries around the world. Let us not forget, women and girls cannot even leave the house without being accompanied by a man. So you can all imagine what has happened in so many contexts where all of a sudden there was a flood and the women were terrified to even leave the home. So in many ways, we have to understand that climate and climate change and the devastation brought in by climate change disproportionately affects women and girls. And because of that, though, women and girls understand it best. So over and over, we have also seen women and girls stepping up and being leaders of the climate movement. We see that internationally, and we hear that and see that in very, very many countries around the world. It has been calculated that if we worked on girls' education and with a quality education that includes, for example, sexual and reproductive health and rights and family planning, those would be the two measures that would actually have the largest impact on mitigating climate change, larger than anything else. So the possibility of getting to responses to climate through women and girls are immense. We have to understand that in this respect, girls' education is very closely linked with climate justice, not only climate change, looking at the devastation, but really getting to climate justice. And this is something that at Room to Read is very, very close to our heart. And this is why in the last years, we have been working on a curriculum, in particularly that's framed as supporting girls, not only getting the information they need around climate change so that they can make informed choices around the resources and all that, but also so that they can become, in many ways, climate activists within their own families and their own communities. They can step up to that leadership role that we know they can have and they want to have. And we will be implementing this curriculum through clubs in a number of countries around the world. And then we will also make sure that the curriculum that we provide to girls in all the 8 countries that we work will include dimensions of climate everywhere for the many years to come. So this is something that we are deeply, deeply working on and hope to be able to tell you more already next year as this curriculum will be finalized, and in years to come we'll be able to begin seeing the positive ripple effects of this work.
Right, thank you. That sounds really encouraging. Final question to you, Lucina. In terms of our life skills intervention, we work primarily with girls. So the question is, how are you visualizing the life skills intervention for boys also in school setups, as they're also part of the ecosystem and our counterparts in the community as well as in the school? So what are the plans placed in upcoming years as an organization to really address this need?
I am so excited that all the questions that I'm receiving are really getting to some of the innovations we have been working on really during these last couple of years with greater strength. So we have talked about climate, and this is an important one. We must talk also about the work with boys. We are now beginning implementation this year of a gender transformative life skills curriculum for boys. So we are working with boys in public schools and provide them with life skill classes that are in many ways complementary to the life skill classes that we provide to girls. Understanding that the type of gender norms that girls are faced with, and how limited those gender norms are complementary and different than the types of gender norms that boys are faced with, and what the negative impact of those norms are for them. And so we are working on offerings that will be partly for boys only, and then there will be classes for girls and some of the classes together, so that boys and girls can really become stronger and better supporters of each other's, and really team members and classmates and friends, and supporting one another's development and supporting one another in challenging those social norms that ultimately harm society and harm everyone. Because I think, as Stephanie said, before, gender equality is really for everyone. We have been talking here about girls' education because the incredible challenges and hurdles that in very many countries around the world girls face, and the numbers of girls dropping out that are higher than those of boys in very, very many places. this does not mean that girls can respond to those problems alone. This does not mean that women and girls will be able to fix gender equality alone. We need men and boys to step up, and we believe that education is an essential place for them to begin to do so, and to begin being exposed with the ideas that will help them become happier men, happier friends, better husbands if they decide to get married at some point, and overall just more functioning citizens and human beings. And so I'm excited that we will be diving deep into this type of work also on years to come.
Yes, definitely. I hope we'll be able to work on that need and have men and young boys be a better ally to girls' education. Finally, I think we are done with all the questions that we've received. However, Professor Menon has raised her hand, and I request you to kindly unmute yourself and ask your question if you have any.
Ishani, that's really purely by mistake.
Okay, no problem, ma'am. Thank you, Lucina, for addressing all the questions. We'll now move on to the next part of our web event, which is the panel discussion on girls' education driving leadership in the 20th century. For this discussion, I will invite my colleague, Ms. Reema Shrestha. She will be moderating the panel. Reema is an Associate Director, Girls' Education and Gender Equality Program for South Asia region of Room to Read, which operates out of India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, along with Sri Lanka. She has more than 14 years of experience in the development field. She is a PhD scholar from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Bombay. She has expertise in the area of girls' education and youth empowerment, gender equality, life skills education, and financial literacy. Reema takes deep interest in working with girls, and their empowerment has always been her passion. I welcome Reema to the space. Over to you, Reema.
Thank you so much, Ishani. And it is an honor and privilege to have the distinguished panelists to our audience. And before that, it was really wonderful listening to keynote speakers, Stephanie and Lucina, really motivating us to work more. The global health pandemic has shined a harsh light on the vulnerability and challenges humanity faces. So adolescent girls from underprivileged background have been the worst hit. We are at a time where we need to build back better. The challenges for us is to see how we ensure that adolescent girls get to fruitful learning journey in the new normal. In today's panel, we would like to discuss and to identify the actions we need to undertake to link the girls back to school and ensure they have successful caught on. We will also review how the COVID period has been a time of strengthening of skills and how can we take that to the next level, especially for the adolescent girls. We will now begin with our speaker. I will introduce them as they speak. I would like to remind all the participants that the chat box will be open and you can put in your questions there. You may also write who is the question directed to with details of your own. Before we start, I just want to announce that originally we had a plan to invite Sonam, our girls' education participant, as our first panelist. She has her exam today, so since her exam time has changed, we will open up the floor for her later as she joins us. We have 10 to 12 minutes for each of the panel member. At first, I would like to invite Sunisha Ahuja, Education Specialist, Unicef. She has more than 25 years of experience in the education sector. She has worked with Ministry of Education and several non-profit, including Room to Read. With her education background in child development, she has worked on the thematic areas of early childhood education, early literacy, and reading promotion in primary grade. Welcome, Sunisha. And it will be really great to hear from you about the priorities and strategies that UNICEF is identifying to address gender gap that has become wide in the COVID times. And what does it mean if we were looking at a various process relating to getting girls' education for their empowerment on track? So we'd love to hear from you, Sunisha. Over to you.
Thank you, Reema. Happy to be with you on a panel. And congratulations to Room to Read for organizing this panel discussion today on such a critical area, especially given the context of COVID. I think, even before COVID, we had made major gains in terms of bringing girls back to school. We know, and these gains were both in terms of ensuring access at the primary level, ensuring better quality of education for girls in school. I think COVID has really impacted the gains that we have made so far. UNESCO has pointed out that just with one more year of school, the earnings for a girl can increase by about 20%. Education of girls also leads to decline in adolescent pregnancies and therefore its impact on their health moving forward. So I think the need to focus on girls, especially now in the context of COVID, can't be highlighted enough. We see that while the disparities at the primary level had started to kind of fade away, the secondary school classrooms were the space where the inequities were being seen, both in terms of access as well as in terms of learning. I still remember my own personal experience of actually visiting a school. This is pre-COVID, a secondary classroom where the boys and girls were sitting in two separate corners of the classroom, and the girls were of course being made to sit in the in that section of the classroom which had less sunlight. Girls could not see the blackboard, so what the teacher was writing, and these are those issues that kind of start impacting how girls feel received at school, or how schools kind of make girls feel important, and communicate that why their education is also very important for us. Of course, in the last 18 months, India's of course had the longest school closure, while intermittently secondary schools were opened in some states. And even now, I think the priority has been to reopen schools at the secondary level. I just want to kind of talk about, the evidence that we had generated. So UNICEF had done a study in 6 states. This was last year, October. And in this study, what was very, very interesting, and the states that we picked up were states that had a very high burden of out of school children pre-COVID, states that had better governance. So all kinds of backgrounds, context were taken into consideration while selecting states for this study. But what was very, very interesting for us as part of this evidence that we got, that 40% children actually did not access any learning. And that's a very large figure. And when we talk about access to learning, while there was a lot of emphasis initially on adopting the online mode of teaching, 10% children did not have access to any digital tool. And when I say digital tool, I'm referring to both high-tech tools like smartphones, laptops, computer, and the other end of the spectrum being the low-tech tools of radio and television. A lot of the children who were actually learning were being able to learn because governments had prioritized that all children receive their textbooks. And the textbook actually became a major resource for self-learning for children. Though subsequently, many states then came up with learning packages, as well as a lot of organizations, civil society organizations, including Room to Read, providing learning packages as printed material reaching children. 29% children did not have access to a smartphone. While we are planning moving forward on hybrid learning approaches, I think these kind of evidences are going to be very important in terms of trying to understand what is the access to learning, how children are accessing learning, and particularly how girls are accessing learning. For us, another very surprising finding out of this study that we conducted, that the children who were not accessing learning because of lack of awareness. So enough communication had not happened to reach families, to reach children, to inform them how they can access learning. There were students and adolescents who were saying, we do not know how to access digital tools. We don't know where to access the links that are being shared with us. Though WhatsApp did become a very commonly used platform for sharing learning resources or links to access learning resources, but again, it wasn't as if all children were being able to, access these resources. Another very interesting finding for us was, while several states depended on television, given the penetration of television, for learning, it was one of the least used platforms for learning that children were accessing. Radio was even lesser used or seen as a platform that through which lessons could be actually delivered. So it's also important to kind of understand from a community perspective or from the learner's perspective that why these platforms, which perhaps may have had most penetration, did not get used for learning at all. Another important finding, and I think all of us, the previous speakers have spoken about it at a global stage. Within India, I think we already know that there is a very large child population, children in the age group of 6 to 14 years, who were already out of school pre-COVID. But both our study as well as a lot of other evidence in India has pointed out that there is a large percentage. In fact, in our study, it was about 4% children and their families saying that children are not likely to come back to school. And this, I'm saying, is way back in October. And now schools have been really closed for a very, almost one academic year. And therefore, this issue must have even got more severe in terms of children not coming back to school. While COVID has also created so many challenges for us, I think COVID has also given us an opportunity to stop, rethink before we get into building back better. What is this building back better with specific focus on girls? And I think that's something that we really need to think about collaboratively and see based on each of our field experiences, how do we build back better for girls especially. And in that, the first thing that I would like to highlight is, primary schools haven't opened. And one of the major transition points for girls in terms of for girls to go on to complete schooling is to transition from primary school to upper primary schools. And the longer the primary schools stay closed, the risk of girls not coming back to school is going to be very high. And therefore, I think it's time that we all ensure that we all talk about it, both to parents as well as to decision makers, as to why it is important that primary schools reopen now. And vaccination of children should not be made a condition for reopening schools, because there is enough evidence to show that schools are not spaces that will affect the infections, the COVID infections, the COVID numbers. I think it's important all safety protocols are put in place for reopening of schools, because the longer the schools remain closed, the younger children are going to face much larger learning losses. And especially for girls, we know, if girls will not be able to perform at school, for the family, it is a much easier decision to make to get that girl to drop out of school. Uh, while we keep focusing on advocating for all levels of schools to reopen, the other important aspect is that as schools start to reopen, we need to have a very close monitoring, both at the community level while also at the system level, to ensure that all children come back, and especially girls. For this, we need a monitoring system in place. We need to get the school management committees involved in this, to reach out to parents, to help give them the confidence that children would be safe in schools, to communicate to the parents what kind of efforts schools are making in terms of ensuring that schools are safe spaces. So I think, making sure that we have a safe learning environment for children is going to be is a big priority if we really want to see all children coming back to school. I'd also like to, the other aspect for all of us to acknowledge now is COVID has also, enabled adopting technology at a much faster pace. While we know that technology was coming in and was being introduced into our school systems, something that would have happened over the next 4 to 5 years, I think the pace has been hastened. And therefore, there is much more openness about using technology, both by teachers as well as by students. I think moving forward, given that hybrid learning or blended learning will be the way forward for us, from a girls' education perspective, I think access to technology for girls is going to be a big priority. And we really need to make sure that girls will have equal access to technology, uh, uh, you know, uh, as boys will have. Because we've seen that even after the lockdown started to as the lockdowns were removed and things started to reopen, the phones moved out of the family, and therefore children's access to digital tools declined during that time. And some evidence of accessing digital platforms uh, pointed out that mostly it was during late at night that when digital platforms were being used by students or teachers. Another interesting study that I recently came across was that when it comes to ensuring access to technology, parents were more willing to spend money to buy a phone for their male child as compared to the female child. So, we will have to kind of address these issues. During the COVID time, we also know that girls faced other lot of challenges in terms of accessing digital technologies, and that requires a concerted social behavior change kind of campaign that girls will also have. Girls do need equal access to technology. While we talk about access, I think what we also need to focus on is to building capacity for being able to use the different kinds of platforms that are available today for learning. Because evidence is that not everybody feels comfortable using various platforms. Another important area that the COVID pandemic has actually highlighted is the issue of mental health. I think both boys and girls have, families that have had to deal with this health emergency. Both boys and girls have had to face that issue. However, girls may have had to, face more challenges while they were at home. There is a lot of anecdotal feedback that how calls to the child line increased significantly, where of course issues of physical abuse was reported. We know there were more cases of trafficking, early child marriage for girls, and these are the kind of issues that we will need to address moving forward. And therefore mental health, psychosocial health will have to be now incorporated as part of our school system. This is not something, this is a very this will teachers will need capacity building on how to be able to provide support to children, how to be able to provide a listening ear to the girls, and help them fight these kind of challenges. Because moving forward, this could become a big roadblock for children, for girls especially, not attending school and dropping out of school. Coming to the fact of curriculum and pedagogy, I think preparedness for disasters and emergencies. I think while there are specific areas that as part of our country where communities do face different kinds of natural disasters, but I think the COVID-19 pandemic has now kind of also highlighted that disaster preparedness, mitigation strategies are things that our school curriculums will need to incorporate. And as the previous speaker pointed out, I think in all of this, talking about climate change, given the fact that climate change can actually have most impact on girls and women, is going to be an important area to look at moving forward. And then lastly, I think is providing platforms for girls to come and share their, and share and participate in, in decision making for themselves, helping them in making their career choices. And while we look at all of these areas, I think given the fact that we are now, technology will be used to such a large extent in all kinds of solutions moving forward, I would also like to highlight the area of online safety. We know girls have faced abuse. They've been, they've had some really bad experiences as part of WhatsApp groups that they've been part of. So how do we make sure that girls feel safe as they access online tools to be able to, learn? And just finally, I think, closing my remarks, I would say, I think what is important is that we must ensure that learning never stops for girls. and especially girls from the most marginalized, from the most vulnerable communities. And for that, it is vital that girls and young women are supported to become leaders, not only in their own families, but in their communities, in their workplaces, and society, for which having mentors, role models, and support from other girls can be very critical. So I hope that we can all work towards in providing girls an enabling environment, which will help them to go on to complete school education and be leaders of their own communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sunisha. Very insightful sharing, and where we have to learn so much from your study recently UNICEF had done, because we have highlighted that around 40% of the children did not have access to learning, since we are talking about access more. So more of that, we have few points I have just kind of, thought we really have to look into is we have to lots of opportunity. And before we talk about building back better, it's really important for us to talk about, how can we all together as a stakeholder lobby for reopening of primary school, as well as, because you have highlighted that this might risk of girls dropping out more, because this is one kind of, the area where transition from primary to secondary school is there. And another area you have really highlighted on the mental health issues, since both boys and girls are facing mental health issues, but girls had faces more challenges among that. So we really have to make sure that how can we support and how can we incorporate that into the school system. And another area where you have really highlighted, which stuck in my mind, is kind of, we no matter how we work, there are lots of issues on access to the smartphone or access to the learning environment, which we are creating right now. So because one of the reason is we lack of awareness to the community and parents. So for us, it's really important to have how can we work with the community parents on giving them more, enough communication to use. And when you also talked about the curriculum and pedagogy, where preparedness for emergency mitigation strategies really need to be incorporated in the school system, so that in coming days, because coming days we'll have to be ready with whatever natural disasters come up, so that our student doesn't have to doesn't have to leave the school, or doesn't have to be away from the education. And also we really have to provide a platform for girls to share and participate. I think this area is really important to listen to them, and then we have to really create a platform so that they can share, and we can support to them on decision making of their career, and we can be a pillar, or we can give them that platform so that they can come. And lastly, you also very important point you highlighted is on the online safety, since we are going to blended approaches and lots of things are happening in online. So it's really important for us to make sure that our girls are safe, they feel safe, and they don't hesitate to participate online as well. So I also would like to end with the summary of what you said by saying, very good point you said, that we must ensure that learning never stops for girls. So thank you so much, Sunisha, very insightful. And we have questions to you, but I'll be addressing it at the end of the sharing of all the panel members. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now I would like to invite our second panelist, Dr. Poonam Agrawal, professor and former head, Department of Gender Studies, NCERT, Delhi. So she has more than 38 years of experience on various responsible positions in universities in India as well as in abroad. Minister of Science and Technology, Research Institute in India and abroad, and NCERT. Welcome, Dr. Poonam. Would you please share us some of the priorities NCERT identifies for itself, especially relating to strengthening teachers for bridging the gap of gender gap? So over to you, Professor Poonam.
ये वीडियो इन्होंने उधर से बंद कर रखा है. Kindly, can you?
Okay, yes.
Can you kindly?
We can see you.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see you, Poonam. Professor Poonam. Yeah. Okay.
So thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers from Room to Read to give me this platform for sharing my views. I will be putting my thoughts on post-pandemic risk factors to girls' education and what are the policy levelers, the policy facilitators, so that we can facilitate the smooth transitioning of girls to the schools when the schools reopen. To put my points through, I would also like to share PowerPoint. Please. Slide में. Please screen. Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes, Doctor.
Okay. So indeed, we have lost, unfortunately, quite some advantage of the work of decades, which had led us to almost parity between girls and boys in school education. The gender gap was almost bridged, and we were talking about the gender stereotyping, and as far as the admission and retention of girls was concerned, we had covered quite some ground. But unfortunately, the pandemic of last 2.5 years has taken away much of this advantage from us, and very, very long closure of schools has led to a number of issues uh, of continuation or learning of students in schools. And as is there in all the situations, whether it is war, whether it is some kind of other disaster or child marriage or whatever, these situations, they affect girls and boys differently. Many a times the education of the boy is not so much affected as the education of the girl is affected when any such situation occurs. Maybe due to the safety or security of the girls from that point of view, or from the point of view of the responsibilities that accrue by marriage or whatever. So similarly, the pandemic has also affected the boys and girls differently. There are certain issues which are common to all the genders, and there are some things which are specific to the girls due which the COVID has posed. So the struggles that were common to both boys and girls, these have also been talked about by the speakers earlier. So some of these are loss of learning or difficulty in concentrating, getting addicted to mobiles, and not really being able to study much through the mobile, but doing some other things using that screen time, chatting or playing mobile games, and all these things, and loss of friends, not being able to play with them, not being able to interact with them, has led to various mental issues also, of those of the depression and withdrawal. And of course, home confinement has also led to various physical issues. So these are common to all the genders. There are a number of studies which indicate that these are the struggles that the students have been facing. I will point out just few of them, and then we will come into how we can take the benefit from the policy and facilitate the smooth transitioning of girls to schools. So I would like to quote here a study from Azim Premji University, in which they have found that due to very long closure of the schools, there could have been little or no curricular learning, and also the students have even forgotten what they had earlier learned, the learning loss, and due to this, there is indeed a problem in the loss in the reading, writing, speaking, communication skills of girls. And during the time of pandemic, the students and especially the girls may not be having a good environment for online studies. And also, if some suffered from COVID, so there could be also a side effect of COVID itself, that is the brain fog. And because of the students might be finding it difficult to concentrate on their studies and not being able to learn properly when the online classes were on. There are also issues of mental health due to closure of the schools. Here I would like to quote a literature review published in the Sage Journal, which says that there has been disruption in the education and uh, being able to communicate with their friends, play, and the physical activities. And due to that, there are indeed certain mental issues among the children, among the adolescents, and they are feeling anxious, and they are not able to focus on their studies. Also, the same review also says that because of the increased screen time, there have been undue addictions, looking into the objectionable content. And one thing which is specific to the girls is that being bullied or being abused online, for this thing, the girls are more vulnerable as compared to boys. So these are some of the things that are common to all the genders in a way, boys, girls, transgender, all of them, maybe to different extents. But there are some of the things which indicate that girls are more vulnerable to discontinuation of education. They are at a higher risk that they may not return to the schools when the schools reopen, and also the issue of the performance when the schools are opening. So what are these pointers which are specific to the girls, which make girls more susceptible to learning loss or not being able to attend to the school when they reopen? So the struggles that are very specific to the girls due to the pandemic, these include that there is increased pressure of household chores and caregiving responsibilities. There are also a number of instances that are being reported from the schools that the girls are being forced into marriage or pregnancies. And also there have always been some oppressors to girls' education who didn't really value girls' education equally. And so these people also got a chance due to pandemic when the schools were closed, that they got just kind of used to girls not going to schools. And then there was something behind in their mind that it's okay if the girls are not going to the school. And also from the point of view of the security community, with time, due to long closure of schools, might feel that the girls should be kept in the safety of the homes. Again, to make these points clear, there are certain studies, like a study placed in the rural areas in India. It does illustrate that the girls are indeed assisting their parents in household and caregiving responsibilities, or if they are from rural villages, rural areas, then tending to cattle or doing such work. So they are distracted from their education, and they are attending more to the household and other responsibilities. Also, because of COVID, the people have lost their earning, their jobs, and so the poverty has increased, and also the girls may be doing some little jobs which were giving them some earning for themselves. So this could have led to an increased decision making power for them, but because they have lost these little work that they were doing, and the family also is under poverty, so there is an increased pressure. The parents might say, okay, you're not going to the school, you're not earning, so why not get married? So this has indeed led to increase in the child marriages. And one very important factor is that when the schools are open, then the girls have a kind of a safety net, because if any such thing happens, then they can report to their teachers, they can report to the principal about if they are forced into marriage or something, and then the school takes some action. They may contact the local authorities or they contact the police, and then they also try to give first, of course, the counseling to the parents, and many a times they are successful in preventing that early marriage of the girl. And the study, of course, placed in Bihar, MP, UP, and Rajasthan does emphasize that yes, there is an increased risk for the girls dropping out from the school when the schools reopen, and they may end up into early marriage or early pregnancy, etc. Also more prone to violence. And I study also and says that yes, indeed, the students are missing the safety net in the school, and therefore they are becoming more prone to getting married and then not returning to the schools when the schools reopen. Another study, which is again placed in UP and Bihar, it indicates that there are already certain inequalities that are there, which are gender-based, in which the girls are not getting as much attention as far as their nutrition, health care is concerned, or the education. And this inequality already puts them at a disadvantage when they are not enough equipped to face the problems or to overcome the problems that come before them. So that makes them more susceptible to depression or insecurities, and which leads to stress and anxiety. And a very important factor was the sexual assault, which has already been there from the point of view of the girl's safety and security. And this factor has become much more strong if the girl child has lost one or both the parents due to the COVID. So such a girl becomes very vulnerable to sexual assault.
Dr. Poonam, maybe you might have to wrap up in 2 or 3
Okay,
minutes.
I will be quick. I will be quick. So it is more challenging to bring the girls back to the school to assure their continuance and completion and maintain the level of the performance. So I will come to the policy enablers. One very important thing that the National Education Policy 2020 says is the inclusion of many different groups from the society under a socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, SEDGs. This time, exceptionally, they include the geographical identities, villages, small towns, etc., and also various socioeconomic conditions, the migrants, the poor people, the children from the victims of trafficking, or those who are themselves the victim of trafficking. So the teachers and what are the action points are that teachers can take advantage of the provisions that all these groups are now specifically included under the SEDGs, and the specific plans can be made for those girls who belong to these geographical areas or these socioeconomic conditions, and pinpointedly the roadmap can be made for them to bring back to the schools. Again, the policy also has taken a very strong focus on the dropouts and has provisioned the student tracking system, both for the participation as well as for the learning levels. So for that also, teachers can identify what is the root cause and track them, and according to that, the specific pinpointed messages can be formulated for the girl child or for parents or guardian, so that they can be brought to school, and of course, wherever needed, personal visits can be made. A very, very important feature is, which was not earlier there, is the gender inclusion fund. And it is there in the policy that with the gender inclusion fund, the states can do the interventions specific local oriented in the local context, so that the girls can be provided support as per their specific needs, be it counseling, additional coaching, some kind of giving the smartphones or tablets, or giving some additional scholarship, etc. to them. And taking these together, the student tracking and the gender inclusion fund, etc., and also the counseling. The previous speaker had indicated about the emotional adjustment, etc. For that, there is also a provision of the counseling, which can also be ensured using the gender inclusion fund. And this will help the girls pinpointedly whether they have to cope up with the learning loss, or they are having some mental issue, or for any other thing if they need for their performance, etc. Although mostly in Room to Read, the focus is on adolescent girls, but there are studies which say that due to online education, the youngest age group is the one which is most affected. Therefore, and the policy also gives a lot of emphasis on foundational skills. Therefore, a lot of attention should also be paid to the early learner girls. Another important point is the mobilization of community and local administration. Already quite some responsibilities are given to local administration for tracking of the students, and these indeed can play a very important role in bringing back the girls and creating awareness about child rights, motivating parents, etc. So thank you very much, and any questions or queries are most welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Poonam. Very insightful sharing on the challenges, and also regarding the policy enable. You have highlighted a few very important points, be it to be student tracking system from counseling system, very important point. So we'll be taking questions at the end of the panelists. So we have two panelists will be sharing. So after that, we'll be taking questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Poonam.
Thank you.
Yeah, so now it is our pleasure to have Professor Krishna Menon, School of Human Studies, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi. During her academic career of more than 3 decades, Professor Menon has worked in the Department of Political Science, Lady Sri Ram College for Women, University of Delhi, and as a lecturer, Department of Political Science, School of Social Science, Indira Gandhi National Open Universities. She has published several books, papers, and articles on the above fields. Dr. Menon was awarded the Teacher of Distinctions Award by the Vice Chancellor of the University of Delhi in 2009. Professor Menon, welcome. Would you please share your thoughts on highlighting learnings and gains from the pandemic for girls' education and compounding new learnings to ensure self-learning for girls? So thank you so much, and please, over to you, Professor Krishnan. Yeah.
Thank you, Rima. Good afternoon, friends. I'm very honored to be a part of this webinar organized by Room to Read, and to be associated with your remarkable work in the sphere of girls' education. I was really inspired by, the work, the detailing of the work done by Room to Read, by Lucina's accounts of your efforts, and I'm truly honored to be a part of this diverse and distinguished panel today, moderated by you, Rima. And thank you, Ishani, for thinking of me and inviting me to join this session. This is an area that is of great interest to me as a teacher and researcher located within the academic area of gender studies. The issue of girls and young women's education is of obvious interest to me. In fact, of the current research scholars who are enrolled with me for their MPhil and PhD degrees, quite a few of them are actually looking at the gendered aspects of school education. Although I must confess that unlike all of you here, I'm no expert in the field of public policy in general or policies that address girls' education in particular. However, my memories of school and I think my interest in gendered analysis of education make me sort of a comfortable fit in the gathering such as this here today. So I was fortunate to attend a girls-only school in the capital of India here in Delhi that was committed to fostering national pride without being xenophobic or inward-looking. The school gave to the young girls who were its students an empowering and all-round education that tried to address the mind, body, and soul or spirit of the students. It initiated tender and loving lessons in female solidarity without necessarily naming it feminism. I owe a lot to my beloved school, and yet we are painfully aware of the reality today where scores of young girls whose education has been disrupted and perhaps even discontinued due to the global pandemic of COVID-19. My professional context is that of higher education space, where fascinating and far-reaching transformative changes have taken place as far as gender is concerned, especially women's education is concerned. Obviously, these women could not have entered the higher education spaces but for the changes that have taken place over the decades in school education, because it's obviously only after school education that they get to the university. It's important for us to know that in India, we've traveled a remarkable distance. There were just about 10% of women students in higher education institutions at the time of independence in 1947. But by the year 2000, this figure jumped to 40% and has been inching close to 47.6%, almost 50% by the end of 2018. This journey has been possible because of the remarkable commitment and work done in the area of girls' education in schools. So, as a person who is located in the higher education space, it would be really facile of me to ignore the importance of girls' education in schools. Being all of this is really giving us only average numbers, the figures I quoted just now. This figure, of course, continues to hide the unevenness in the nature of women's involvement or girls' involvement in education. So if you see, as you go up in the pyramid of education, women continue to be underrepresented in what are known as the elite national institutions like the Indian Institute of Technology, the Indian Institute of Management, the Central Scientific Research Institutes, and even in the bigger universities. But there is no getting away from the overall fact that what a few decades ago was still an elite male bastion has decisively given way to a situation which is close to gender parity when it comes to the presence of women students. In fact, in no other public institutional space in India can you see this dramatic change as much as you see in the context of higher education spaces. So be it the bureaucracy in India, be it the judiciary in India, or of course the parliament in India, where the Women's Reservation Bill has been languishing for years, you don't see this kind of a dramatic change that you see in the arena of higher education. This dramatic transformation has happened only because of the expansion of the number of schools and increase in access to schools for girls through a variety of innovative policies and programs. Worryingly for us, as more and more girls are withdrawing from schools across the world during this pandemic, perhaps never to go back to school, the impact will be felt on higher education spaces as well in a couple of years' time. For this morning, I've been asked to think about, amongst many things, I've chosen to think a little bit about curriculum, pedagogy, and online education. So brief thoughts about all these three. The COVID-19 has changed the world, and it is changing it in ever so consistent ways. Every day we are experiencing a new world, actually, not what we were used to before. One of the sectors that has undergone a great deal of change is the education sector.
From preschool to university and research centers, all have had to respond to the pandemic in their own specific ways. In the brief provided for me for this afternoon, I've been asked to think, amongst various other things, about the impact of the pandemic on curriculum planning. At this stage, the situation is still very fluid and it's unfolding. So I shall share some preliminary thoughts and ideas. The pandemic has compelled us to move beyond a worldview that was based on certitude and the arrogance of always being in control. The pandemic has taught us about the vulnerability of human life. It has taught us about interdependence, and it has highlighted inequalities in our societies. I think these are three crucial values that our curriculum must reflect when we think about the post-pandemic curriculum. This calls for us to come forward with a refreshingly new approach to education. We are witnessing a total breakdown of what we imagined as futures, certain. Everybody knew what they're going to be doing next year or even 10 years down the line. So it's a time when the question, like we teachers often ask students, so what are you planning to do next? This question has become rather irrelevant because nobody really knows what you're going to do next. Should we continue as though it's business as usual? Follow academic calendars, exam deadlines, course loads, convocation dates as in the past? Or should this be a time to visit our understanding of what it means to be educated? And if we do that, we'd have to revisit our curriculums. Do we work towards only formalized certification and the attendant rituals of completing the syllabus, holding exams, following the timetable with robotic efficiency and congratulate ourselves about that? Or do we ask some difficult questions? I think it's the time to do latter. And there are, happily for us, groups of teachers, administrators, and institution leaders are actually trying to think about all of these things. When we talk about curriculum, the question that is of central importance is what is considered knowledge and what is considered worth teaching and learning. Can our students who, like us, are coping with death and grief continue to learn and take exams as before? So we need to rethink our assessment and evaluation strategies as well. We are faced with questions such as, is the existing curriculum relevant even as families and communities are stalked by fear of the loss of lives and livelihoods? Can our students be expected to continue to learn through the experiences that life has to offer? In this case, the experience of illness, death, grief, anxiety, loss of employment. Are the conventional exams and evaluation systems relevant when life itself is so precariously placed? The pandemic has compelled us to think about the place of emotions and feelings, empathy and compassion within educational spaces. So I think these qualities or these values must find their way into the curriculum. In the post-pandemic world, the curriculum must engage with the stark inequalities that stand exposed, the nature of life that is interconnected and interdependent, and the inherent uncertainty of life. These lessons would hopefully find their way into the curriculum of the post-pandemic schools. The COVID-19 has taught us yet another important lesson, and this lesson resonates with the title of today's webinar, Leadership Ki Tarang, Leadership for Educational Journeys. Stephanie Foster, earlier in the morning, spoke evocatively about the need to empower the girls and bring them into these conversations and ask them for their opinions. Now, how do girls have opinions? In many societies, hierarchically organized societies, girls are taught very carefully not to have opinions. And even if they have opinions, not to ever express or share it. So one of the things that I think the pandemic has really taught us is that about the styles of...
Sorry to disturb you. So maybe you would you please wrap up in a minute or so?
Yes, I shall.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think one of the crucial lessons that we are learning is about the nature of leadership required to manage crisis. Leadership that centers compassion, consultation, collaboration, and creative thinking, rather than the old style leadership characterized by centralized and unilateral decision making. I think this is something that should find its way into our curriculum and help our girls realize the importance of dialogic models of leadership and become leaders who are able to listen and learn, even while thinking of solutions that are compassionate and creative. There are many other thoughts that I have, but in the interest of keeping to time, I'm just going to compress it and say that in my presentation, I had some thoughts about the pedagogy that we could work with in the post-COVID world. I had some thoughts about online education and how we, the debates amongst educators about the relevance of online education. But I'll move to the concluding section of my presentation, where I'm going to say that unless and until the hidden labor performed by girls and women within the households is acknowledged, the long hours of care work that they undertake is acknowledged, easier access to health, education, and leisure is guaranteed to girls and women, along with fair wages and employment opportunities, it would be very difficult to mitigate the far-reaching consequences of the withdrawal of girls and young women from the education systems across the world. It is for us as teachers and education administrators to think creatively and compassionately to bring back the girls and young women into the education system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Krishnan. It's very important point you have raised. However, due to time, we lack of hearing on the pedagogy and online learning. Definitely will be talking to you more on this in due course of timing. And you have really highlighted important point that we really have to rethink on the existing curriculum we have. During this changing time, we really have to rethink on how can we build this curriculum better to address this current situation as we link with interdependent and inequality in society. So we really have to highlight those areas, and we really have to work with the concerned party to make more curriculum more responsive to this current situation. Thank you so much. Very insightful and very nice to hear from you. Now, so we are joined by our dear Sonam, and I would like to invite her for all of us to hear her reflections. Ms. Sonam is a Room to Read Girls Education Program participant. She is 16 years and 11th grader of Sarvodaya Kanya Vidyalaya, Motibagh, New Delhi. She has been part of Room to Read's life journey and program since grade 6. Let's listen to her as she shares her experience of the pandemic and how she has navigated the same. Sonam school has reopened and she's really excited to back as well. So just wanted to let you know that Sonam will be speaking in Hindi. Welcome Sonam. आपका स्वागत है आज के इस चर्चा में. साथ जुड़ने के लिए धन्यवाद. थैंक यू सो मच सोनम. सो किस तरह की चुनौतियां आए हैं इस दौरान, थोड़ा हमें वो बताइए आप, और ये भी कि आप आगे आने वाले समय में किस तरह से बालिका शिक्षा को मजबूत किया जा सकता है. सो आप अपनी एक्सपीरियंस और अपने सिखाई की तरह से हम लोग को कुछ सुझाव दीजिएगा. सो अब आप बात कर सकते हैं सोनम. ओवर टू यू. यस सोनम. हाँ, देख सकते हैं हम लोग.
नमस्कार दोस्तों, मेरा नाम सोनम है. मैं कक्षा 11वीं की छात्रा हूँ. मेरे परिवार में कुछ 5 सदस्य हैं, जैसे कि मेरे पिताजी माली का काम करते हैं, व माताजी घर संभालती हैं. रूम टू रीड से मैं 6ठी कक्षा से जुड़ी हूँ, जहाँ पर मैंने अलग अलग विषय पे सेशन लिया है. परिवार के साथ संवेदना रखना व हमदर्दी, अपने आप के बारे में जानना. साथ ही लॉकडाउन के दौरान मैंने रिजल्ट ना आने तक अपने समय को वेस्ट ना करते हुए उस व्यस्त न करते हुए साथ ही घर में नई नई चीजें बनाना सीखा और अपने दोस्तों की पढ़ाई में मदद की। इसके साथ मैं यह भी जोड़ना चाहती हूँ कि स्कूल खुलने के बाद भी लड़कियों को किन किन समस्या के कारण स्कूल नहीं आ पाती, जैसे कि पैसों की प्रॉब्लम, दूसरी समस्या स्वास्थ्य बिगड़ने का डर, तीसरी समस्या कुछ लड़कियां अभी भी अपने गांव में हैं। इसके साथ ये भी जोड़ना चाहती हूँ कि कुछ समस्या दिखती तो है छोटी जैसे कि है बड़ी, घर के कामकाज का दबाव, दूसरी समस्या घर के कामकाज के साथ स्कूल का काम न करने के कारण, टीचर की डांट के कारण दूसरे दिन स्कूल न जाना, चौथी प्रॉब्लम माता पिता को यह न समझना कि अपने बच्चों को स्कूल भेजें, और चौथी समस्या लॉकडाउन के दौरान लड़कियों को 2 साल के लिए फोन दिया गया, परंतु उसका कुछ नकारात्मक प्रभाव भी देखा गया। जैसे कि मेरी एक सहेली है, उसके पिता ने उसे फोन पढ़ाई के लिए दिया, पर उसके पिता ने उसके फोन में कुछ ऐसा देखा जो वो नहीं चाहते थे कि मेरी बेटी ये सब करे। फिर उसके पिता ने इस नतीजे पे पहुंचे कि वह अब स्कूल नहीं जाएगी। फिर हमारे स्कूल की एसएम दीदी ने उनके पेरेंट्स से बात करी, फिर वह दोबारा स्कूल आने लगे। लेकिन हर स्कूल में रूम टू रीड या एसएम दीदी नहीं होती, इसीलिए अभिभावक और टीचर को यह समझना होगा और बच्चों को समझाना होगा कि वह उन्हें प्रोत्साहित करें, क्योंकि स्कूल छोड़ना कोई समस्या का समाधान नहीं। जैसे कि मैं अपनी बात बताती हूँ, आज मेरा एग्जाम था और मैं एग्जाम देकर हमारे टीचर और प्रिंसिपल मैम और हमारे पेरेंट्स ने हमें अलाउड किया कि हम आपके साथ जुड़ पाए। धन्यवाद।
थैंक यू सोनम। बहुत अच्छी तरह से आपने अपना एक्सपीरियंस बताया और लाइफ स्किल ने आपको कैसे मदद किया है जो पढ़ाई से जुड़े रहने के लिए, और जैसे कि आपने बताया कि ये सिचुएशन में आपने कैसे हैंडल किया, अपना एग्ज़ाम भी दिया और ये सिचुएशन में फिर यहाँ आके अपने टाइम लेके यहाँ पे ये चर्चा में आप भाग भी लिए बहुत अच्छी तरह से, और हम लोग को बताया कि टीचर्स और का रोल क्या है कि आपको अच्छी तरह से आप लोगों को इन्वायरमेंट घर में कैसे दे। सो थैंक यू सो मच। So as we have completed a round of deliberation by panelists, so let's move to question and answer round. So I could see some of the questions on the chat box. So I would like to pose the question I could see for Sunisha. Participant says that thank you for sharing the insightful findings. The question is, how do you think digital equity can be enhanced for girls, also keeping in mind the taboos attached with digital uses for them? So Sunisha, over to you.
Thank you, Rima. I think, Sonam's sharing of her own experience, I think, alludes to the kind of preparation that is required. So it is not just enough to bridge the digital divide by providing access. I think what is also required is an enabling environment around it. So if girls are provided access to digital tools, I think we'll also need to work with families, we'll need to work with communities in terms of ensuring that girls will have safe access to online, resources. Along with it, also working with girls for helping them in terms of navigating the learning resources. And as Sonam just pointed out, there can be online abuse that girls are likely to face. And therefore, it is very important that we work within that, with the ecosystem on why that abuse is happening, to girls. If that abuse is happening, how do they address it? Who do they bring it to the notice of? So it's a very comprehensive kind of ecosystem planning that will be required. So UNICEF has recently, in fact, launched a social and behavior change campaign, because as like I'd mentioned earlier, we realized that girls have had lower access to digital tools. One, because of economic reasons, but otherwise also within the family, the kind of priority being given to the boys, as well as out of this fear that whether girls will be abused or what else will is likely to happen. So as part of this campaign, we are creating communication material, which is going to be shared with school management committees, with other community level groups, and especially involve mothers as part of this campaign, because they are the first kind of line of support that girls have within families. So I think these are just first few steps that have been taken, but there is a long way to go to ensure that there is equal access for digital tools for girls.
Thank you so much, Sunisha, for the answer. So I'll go for another question. So question is for Professor Menon. Professor Menon, kindly share your thoughts on pedagogical and curriculum approaches that needs to take on from the pandemic and the learning from it. So we have heard and read a lot about learning losses. How are we to bridge the link between learning gains and way ahead in terms of curriculum and pedagogy? Over to you, Professor Menon.
Yeah, thank you, Rima. Learning loss is a term that I have been hearing a lot. And it must be having a specific connotation within the world of education studies. But as a layperson and as somebody from outside of this frame, I would say that while young girls and young women students have certainly lost within quotes, the being part of the formal schooling or formal university system, and that must have resulted in some academic or curricular deficiency or gaps. But I think that most girls and most young women, and I heard one of the panelists allude to this, have actually risen to the occasion in a manner of speaking because of course, the gendered role of caregiving that they are expected to perform. I think girls and young women have learned extremely valuable lessons through this pandemic about the vulnerability of human life, the ability to mitigate challenges when you work in group and with solidarity, the need to reach out to others and assist, the importance of just picking up the phone and asking, are you all right? So counseling skills, which they didn't know that they possessed, they've actually honed those skills and acquired that ability, and they've learned a lot about healthcare, how to monitor fever, how to prevent the person from getting dehydrated. So a lot of lessons, both biological as well as sociological, have actually been learned by girls and young women students. So I think it would be our duty as teachers and administrators to somehow bring this learning, and one person alone cannot do this. This will have to be a series of deliberations and roundtable talks to evolve a curriculum that, like Sonam talked about right now, experiences of this kind, how do you collate that, systematize it, theorize it, and make it part of the curriculum to deal with the challenges that the post-pandemic world, I heard others talk about climate, justice and disaster management, instead of really giving, I mean, of course, these labels are important, but what we are really saying is the importance of social intervention in responding to what are essentially social challenges. The time has come when our curriculum has to move away from individual students trying to perfect their chances of success in the world through scoring high marks, to imagining a world which is constructed by what some scholars have called biophilic consciousness, a consciousness where you are aware of your integral interconnection with the world of nature, with the planetary systems, with other human beings, animals, birds, everybody else, and thus have that reflect in the curriculum. So I think this is, I would say, I mean, it sounds really trite if I say it's not a learning loss, but a learning gain. I don't want to make it so simplistic. I think lots of lessons have been learned. It will be up to us to see how we bring those lessons into the formal curriculum.
Thank you so much, Professor Menon. Now, since I'll be taking only 3 questions, so last question would be for Dr. Poonam. Dr. Poonam, can you detail on the specific effort by NCERT in ensuring social emotional well-being of girls? Was there any capacity building exercise for the teachers, or was there any collaboration with CSO's volunteer organization? So over to you, Dr. Poonam.
Thank you very much. The socio-emotional aspect of girls is an extremely important thing. So in all our capacity building programs, we deal this issue of the socio-emotional well-being. Our department, the Department of Gender Studies, has prepared training material for the teacher educators and teachers. In that, the module also, the training material also contains a module on the life skills. So this life skills also deals with the socio-emotional aspect, how to make us comfortable with that. And also there is a platform Mano Darpan, which is available 24/7, and also these are available on the YouTube. So at this platform, the girls can share their problems. There is also a psychiatrist available, and they can get the help about these problems. And of course, the gender issues are always integrated. We constantly look our books from the point of view of gender friendliness, what is the gender appropriate behavior, and those things are incorporated in the curriculum also. The contributions from girls, contributions from women in different spheres, so that the girls feel motivated. And also whatever, any bias should not be there, any discrimination should not be there. Our curriculum should be such which inculcates the respect towards girls and their contributions, so as to make them more comfortable and more their self-esteem is increased. So these through its curriculum pedagogy also, we give a lot of stress on gender friendly pedagogy. Through all these, the NCERT is championing the issue of tackling of the socio-emotional aspects of girls. And also one of our constituent unit is Central Institute of Educational Technology. They also, through various their training programs, deal with this issue.
Thank you so much, Dr. Poonam, for the response. For all the participants, we have actually received lots of questions, so we'll try to find a way to answer all the responses, maybe via email. So thank you so much for active participation. So we have now 2 major goals to achieve. One is how to make school gender responsive, and how to make girls 21st century learners. So the 21st century is about being able to make decisions in constantly changing world, where getting to a school is the first step, and fostering one's ability to make informed choices in the required direction. Today's discussion has really helped us to understand the context much deeper, and will show us a path to achieve the goal. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Once again, I would like to extend my gratitude to all the panelists for sharing their very important, insightful thoughts. Now, I would like to hand over the floor back to our MC. Over to you, Ishani.
Thank you, Rima. This was a really, really interesting space to be part of. I really thank all the panelists for gracing the space and bringing in your thoughts and perspective on building leadership, adolescent girl leadership. I think this has, the conversations will also steer a lot of strategies and perspective building on the ground. So thank you again. It is useful that we move forward and also close the space. For this, I'd invite Ms. Pooja Trishal to deliver the vote of thanks and the closing words. Pooja is the program operations director in Room to Read India and is responsible for program implementation on the ground. Pooja brings over 20 years of professional experience on the issues of education, livelihood, health, and women empowerment. The stage is yours, Pooja.
Thank you, Ishani. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Room to Read, it is my honor to present the vote of thanks today. I'm sure we all agree that we had a great thought-provoking discussion and we all got some food for thought. To begin with, I would like to thank Stephanie for setting the pitch and emphasizing that education is a right for every girl child, and educated children offer tremendous impact in terms of accelerating the economic growth globally. Also, thanks for highlighting that for creating gender-responsive ecosystem, policies need to be backed with adequate resources, funding support, and it's important to listen to the voices of girls. Lugina, thank you for presenting the essence of RTR's work around girls' education and gender equality and the learnings it has offered. Big thanks to our panel members Sunisha Ahuja from Unicef, Dr. Poonam Agrawal from NCERT, and Professor Krishna Menon from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University for sharing your insights and suggesting gender-responsive solutions to ensure that the gains made with regard to girls' education are not lost. Sunisha, in addition to the data evidence that you talked about, I think your remarks about building back better, which need to be incorporated in the education system, are extremely, extremely important. And you talked about mental health and psychosocial health, equal access to technology, cyber safety, addressing gender gaps in disaster management and climate change. Thank you for all those very important points. Dr. Agrawal, thank you for highlighting how the pandemic affects boys and girls differently and how it aggravates the struggles for girls. NEP 2020 being a policy enabler, yes, of course, and we are really looking forward to it making that difference on the ground. And thank you also for talking about the Gender Inclusion Fund. Thank you so much. Dr. Krishna Menon, again, a big thank you to you. Thanks for emphasizing that, we need to be asking some very difficult questions in order to bring in new approach to education, and the need to revisit curriculum with focus on values, something extremely important in order to address the inequalities. Rima, thank you to you for moderating the entire panel discussion in a very seamless manner. Sonam, आपने बहुत खूबसूरती से अपनी बात कही और लड़कियों के पक्ष को आगे रखा. धन्यवाद आपका कि आपने अपना एक्सपीरियंस हम सबके साथ शेयर किया. I also take this opportunity to tell all the girls who have joined us today that remember, you're capable, you're unstoppable, you're the power to lead and inspire and make a difference to the future of humankind. Thanks to all the participants, including partners, for joining us today and also posing some very critical questions which enhance the overall quality of discussions. Lastly, thanks to RTR team who worked to put this webinar together. And as I wrap up my remarks, I would like to reiterate that Room to Read applauds every girl child for breaking barriers and moving towards a more equitable future. On this International Day of Girl Child, I hope that we all renew our commitment towards addressing challenges girls face and promoting empowerment through education to drive leadership in 21st century. Thank you.